of abstract before. This is perhaps the most abstract chapter we're going to study. Okay, for analyzing playtesting, Fullerton suggests that you should break it down into discrete phases for a couple of reasons. One is that a game, we know it's a system, it's a very complex system. And because it's a complex system, you can't fix everything all at once. So she's given you some advice on how to break it down. What should you be playtesting for? Well, here are the phases suggested by Tracy Fullerton. She believes you should be testing for functionality of the game. You should be testing for completeness of the game. And you should be playtesting for the balance of the game. And today's lecture is going to be all about those concepts. First, let's talk about, is your game functional? How do you determine that? Well, you should recruit playtesters who have never seen this game before. And then watch them play the game from start to finish and reach that final moment in the game. And if the players make it to the end without any input from you, then congratulations. That means your game is functional. Functional definition is the players can make it to the end of the game. There's enough information for them to figure out how to do that without you giving them hints. If the playtesters get stuck somewhere in the game, that means your game is not functional. If they can't figure it out, if you have to give them a hint, you've created a non-functional game. And I have certainly done that a few times. A game is not functional until your players can complete it. You've got to add more information to the game or make it a little easier somewhere if it's impossible to complete. There may be more to it, though. There's also the problem of, can a case come up that's not covered by the rules of the game? Your first few playtesting sessions may not uncover that case. Do the players find themselves arguing about what should have happened? This happens less in computer games than in board games, but it can happen in computer games. And is it possible for the players to reach an impasse, a point where they can't go on because they don't understand how to go on? They don't understand what the rules are telling them. Or do the players discover a way that they can always win? Like in Evil Clutches, if you gave yourself a dragon that fires infinite fireballs and there's no penalty to hitting every possible target that appears in the game, then it's pretty easy to always win. Here's an example. Early multiplayer gamers discovered the idea of spawn camping. The problem is that characters must enter the game somewhere in the field of play. What's wrong with sitting there knowing where they're going to spawn and just shooting them, killing them the instant they appear? The game allows it, so why isn't that a good strategy? Well, we know it makes it not fun for the person who is the victim of the spawn camping. The question is a game that allows spawn camping a complete game? Because you've got a strategy in there that allows you to always win. What can you do to fix the problem? Here are some more completeness problems. Games that have loopholes. Good example is the abuse of the lamb in the game Deus Ex. The lightweight attack munition, which was a mine-like device that you could attach to a surface, and then it would explode later. It turns out if you attached it to a surface, you could climb on it, and you could go over walls that the game designer never intended you to go over, and reach points in the game you were never intended to reach. It wasn't intended as a climbing tool. It turned out to be a loophole. Players loved that loophole. But it made the game play differently than the designers had intended. How about some more completeness problems, such as dead ends? If your characters can get to a point in the game where they are stuck and they can't go back and they can't go forward and they can't go anywhere, they are at a dead end. The game will no longer be fun for them. If they have no way out, as far as they're concerned, the game is over. It's time to rage quit your game. Now, completeness is a judgment call. It's a lot like fun. You can call a game complete any time that you believe your game is complete. For example, lamb climbing is not considered a bug by the people who designed Deus Ex. They decided to leave it in there, and they're still calling it complete. Spawn camping in many games is still permitted, and that game is still considered complete. But many games are never truly complete in the opinion of all players and game designers. There's always someone who thinks there's something that should have been done differently. Online games, for example, are constantly adding new content, especially these Facebook games. They sometimes have special content every week. Let's talk now about the concept of the game being balanced. First question to ask yourself is, does the player's experience meet your goals as a game designer? Did they have the challenge you expected? Did they experience the level of concentration you wanted them to experience? You can balance a game for skill. Classic example that goes back centuries is golf, where they invented the golf handicap. The idea of the golf handicap is that players have different levels of skill. Well, with a handicap, a certain number of stroke handicap, players with differing levels of skill can play against each other and still enjoy a game of golf. Handicaps are usually handled on a course-by-course basis by that particular golf course, but there are various different ways that golf handicaps are used, and that is a balance for skill that goes way back and has a great tradition and a long time. Now, balancing for skill is a little trickier. In Artemis Spaceship Bridge Simulator, for example, a multiplayer game, how do you do multiple multiplayer difficulty settings when everybody is playing in the same starship, for example? You have to set all the enemies to a certain level. Well, in order to do that, remember that high skill players will be in a position to help the low skill players. And so what that means is you'll need to be able to provide them with a difficulty setting somewhere in the medium range, because you won't be able to set it for an entire crew of high skill players or an entire crew of low skill players. So you can't just have 2 or 3 difficulty levels. You should have a wide variety in multiplayer games and provide ways for players to assist each other if it's a co-op game. More questions about game balance. Do the starting positions of the characters or game pieces or whatever give one side an unfair advantage? Identical starting positions would indicate a symmetrical game like chess or backgammon or basketball. Football, for example, starts with a kicking team and a receiving team, so it's not identical starting positions. Basketball starts with a tip-off, however. Asymmetrical games may give one side an advantage, so you may have to do some balancing tricks. If you've got one side totally surrounded by the other and outnumbered and outgunned. Many tactical simulations do this intentionally, sometimes for fun, sometimes to provide missions or scenarios that players of differing skills can have, or sometimes to recreate something that actually occurred historically. Because most historical conflicts were asymmetrical, even the ones that seem to be completely symmetrical, as close as you could possibly get, like the Hood fighting the Bismarck here, both with 15-inch guns when they fought historically. The Bismarck, however, had much better 15-inch guns and much better armor, and using the tables in this battle wagon game, you can see that the two ships are not evenly matched, despite the fact that on paper it looked like they were. And in fact, the Bismarck totally trounced the Hood in the historical battle. Other things about balance. Well, what variables can you change? You could change the firing rate of your dragon here to help balance that game. Very few people had the super rapid fire fireballs in their game. They had the key had to be pressed once for each fireball. You couldn't just hold down the space bar to get limitless fireballs. You could actually have a counter. In the game I provided for you to play test, Popsicle Rescue, I had a counter so that only 2 diamonds at a time could be fired by your character. And if there were 2 on the screen, you couldn't fire another one until one of the 2 was eliminated by going off the screen. Let's talk about balancing with game dynamics. Suppose in Super Rainbow Reef, catch took up half the screen. That would change the game balance significantly. A giant catch would unbalance that game. You can change the game balance by changing the size of catch, for example. But you might make that a giant catch a power-up you could temporarily experience during the game. Players might enjoy that, and we'll get to that topic in just a moment. All right, dynamic problems can come from a lot of sources. Super objects, like a gigantic catch that fills half the screen. Combinations of objects that lead up to something super when used together. Relationships of objects. Imagine chess played like this, kind of like billiards. If a player takes an opponent's piece, then you get another move. If you take another piece, then you get another move. Your opponent doesn't get to move until you don't take a piece. Wow, that would change the game a lot. It would probably be a lot less fun for both players, I would suspect. The game would be over very quickly, and one player would have not a very good experience. First player to take a piece would probably win. It would end quickly, be a lot less fun for both players. All right. Let's talk about power-ups and dominant objects. All right, you can balance strength with vulnerability or scarcity in Lord of the Rings games. There is only one of the One Rings. It's a very scarce object. Creates a terrible vulnerability. The user loses their purity points very quickly, as Frodo does in this game. Every time he uses it, he risks his life. He risks having all the evil forces in the world converge on him. In Artemis Spaceship Bridge Simulator, you have nuclear bombs that are extremely powerful and can take out entire fleets of enemy ships. But there aren't a lot of those. You can only carry 2 on most starships, if any. And it takes a very long time for your supporting bases to produce them. So those super objects are balanced out through a great scarcity. My mouse is moving without me right now. Okay. Let's say that game balance reinforces character. We're looking at some of the characters in Borderlands right now, Mordecai the Hunter is one of the awesome characters. Then we have Lilith the Siren, one of the characters that you can select. They have very different characteristics, very different strengths and weaknesses, and by creating those strengths and weaknesses and building them into the characters, you actually reinforce the character. You make the character more of a character and more enjoyable for the players by giving them those strengths and weaknesses. You can also balance through asymmetrical game objectives. I think we put up this game of Battlestar Galactica once before where 2 Colonial Vipers are engaging 6 Cylon Raiders. Can that possibly be fun? Outnumbered 3 to 1? Well, what if their objectives are that the humans win in the Vipers, the 2, if one of the 2 Vipers escapes alive, maybe to warn their allies. And the Raiders only win if they destroy both Vipers, and the number of Raiders destroyed doesn't matter to either side. That actually might be a pretty balanced encounter between these 2 forces, and it's achieved only by making the objectives themselves asymmetrical. Let's also talk about asymmetrical resources. Here's a game of Artemis Spaceship Bridge Simulator. Scenario I made where the players in their starship are outnumbered by hordes of AI enemies. There are literally dozens and dozens of enemy starships out there hunting you down and shooting at you. But the player ship is faster than the enemy ships, and the player ship has much stronger weapons than the enemy ships. So by giving them asymmetrical resources, I balance out the extremely asymmetrical numbers in that mission. Another asymmetrical objective is the ticking clock. You run into this in Plants vs. Zombies or just about any tower defense game. I've used this also in games I've made, where if the players survive a certain amount of time, they win. Totally asymmetrical. In Plants vs. Zombies, there's no amount of time the zombies have to survive to win. The zombies have a completely different objective of getting to your front porch. So by having these completely different objectives, the game becomes balanced. Ticking clock objective people often love. All right, that is all we have for this week. Next time, you will not get a lecture from me. Next time, you are going to get a lecture from Tom Robertson, veteran of the computer games industry and expert indie game developer. I'm sure you're going to enjoy everything he has to say. And remember, you will be quizzed on whatever Tom has to say. I will be taking notes on his lecture just like you are. I hope you like it. Until next week, this is Mike Substelny signing off for Intro to Computer Games and Simulations here at Lorain County Community College.